Welcome to this lesson. In our previous lesson, we looked at the 7 main life processes that differentiate living things from non-living things. In this lesson, we are going to look at classification. At the end of the lesson, you should be able to define classification and also state the basis for classification, and finally give some importance of classification. Now, the word classification in science is similar to how we define that in English, because some words in English that are used to define that is to sort out. So if you ask to classify, you'd sort out, or you'd group. You put the items that you are classifying into different groups. But what is the basis for classifying them into groups? It's largely based on or according to some features that they have, and the features would have to be common. So organisms with common features or characteristics go into the same group, and that forms the primary basis for classification. The first basis for classification here is the structure of the organism. So if they have some physical structures that are similar, then they go into the same group. Then if there are similarities in their external and internal features, then it also forms a basis for classifying them or putting them in the same or different groups. Finally, the functions of these external and internal features can also call for them being put in different or the same groups. So you can think of birds and reptiles, for example. So whereas birds have the wings for flying, the reptiles have the 4 limbs, but they don't use these to fly. Okay. And largely they move with this once they have the 4 in their hind limbs, as we know it. Similarly, if you have another organism like the dog and the fish, now they both have tails, but one uses its tail for movement in water, and the other, because it's terrestrial, largely just uses its tail to signify its mood or the excitement. So when a dog sees its owner and is excited, it wiggles its tail. But when a fish moves its tail in water, it propels the fish forward to move in the water. So the functions of these external features, as we are seeing in the case here being the tail for the dog and the fish, we will use to classify them into the groups that they will fall in. Different groups in this case, because these features are used for different purposes. What are some of the importance of classification? You may be wondering. So first off, the classification enables easy identification of organisms. So when we put organisms that share similar characteristics in the same group, then we're able to identify them with the characteristics or that feature that they have in common. Similarly, it enables easier studies of the organism. We are able to study the organisms easily when we classify them or put them in the same group. And finally, it enhances communication among scientists. So scientists are able to communicate better among themselves, knowing the features that organisms they put in the same group or in different groups share or do not have in common. Finally, we'll look at the historical background of biological classification. Now, the scientific study of classification is referred to as taxonomy. And scientists who classify organisms are referred to as taxonomists. And for the purposes of our syllabus and the magnitude of their contributions to taxonomy and science as a whole, there are 3 main scientists that are acknowledged. So Aristotle, John Ray, and Carolus Linnaeus are 3 taxonomists whose immense contribution to classification has now given us a proper and a clear understanding of how organisms are classified into similar groups based on some features that they have in common, and how organisms in different groups differ based on some organisms or their features that they do not share or have in common. So in this lesson, we looked at classification, and largely we define classification as a biological process where organisms are sorted or grouped into, put into different groups based on their common features or characteristics. We also mentioned that the scientific study of classification is referred to as taxonomy, and scientists who study taxonomy or who classify living organisms are referred to as taxonomists. Three main taxonomists we study for the scope of this syllabus: Aristotle, John Ray, and Carolus Linnaeus. In our next lesson, we'll be looking at classification in biology. See you in the next lesson.